Yudam base 10b. Halfway down the page. Chafti v'tashlumei nizkei. Okay. Chafti v'nizkei l'ktani ela v'tashlumei nizkei.
What did you say?
Chafti v'tashlumei nizkei. Yeah. Okay. A person, he's not liable for the damage. He's liable to pay to pay for the damage. In other words, the implication here is that he pays for the net damage. What does that mean? This is sort of an additional source. This is what we're going to the Brisa. The effect of the damage means that the one who was damaged has to deal with the carcass. It's his responsibility. So therefore, the net damage is the value of the damage minus the remaining value of the carcass. We know immediately. How do we know this? So Gemara has three different sources. Amar Ami, the Amar Kra, the pasuk says, "Maka nefesh behema yishalmeno." This refers to Adam Hamazik. So if a person kills an animal, yishalmeno, he has to pay for it. He should pay Ela Yashlimena. He has to fulfill the damages. He has to complete it. Meaning, this obviously is a hint that the one who was damaged has to deal with the carcass. Rav Kahana says from here, in Torif yivi eid hatreif ala yishalom. Okay, what does this mean? This is referring to a shomer, a watchman. So the watchman is supposed to watch an animal, and evidently a fox came, or a wolf, or a coyote, and they consumed the animal. So in Torah, if he has to hatrefa lo yishalom. He brings witnesses to support his claim that it was an accident or whatever. And then he'll be exempt. He'll be exempt to pay. 1 second, hold on. Sorry. We understand. We understand the positive mean here is in Torah. If the animal is consumed, yivi'eyu ad hatreifa lo yishalom. Ad hatreifa yishalom. Treifa atzma lo yishalom. He pays until the value of the carcass, but the value of the carcass itself he doesn't have to pay. Chizki says from here, the hames yaloi. This is referring to a shor hamud. That's a shor that's consistently it's damaged it's intentionally inflicted damage 3 times. So if it does damage again, then he has to pay. He has to pay the hames yaloi, and the carcass will be his lenizik. Meaning to who? To the one who was damaged. So he has to pay minus the carcass. And Chizki learned this well. It's the one who was damaged. You're saying it means a nizik, the one who was damaged. Maybe means the one who did the damage. You can't say that. Why not? Tell me you can't say it. What's the problem? What's wrong with saying that? Rabbi says Isak that the veil of the mazik have. Okay, there's a problem there. If you say the nevelo, the carcass belongs to the mazik, lichter brachmana shor tachas shor v'lishtik v'amesi lamali. If the Torah says you pay back shor tachas shor, 1 ox for an ox, then in effect that means you pay back the full value of the ox. And I would understand the mazik, the one who damaged, has to pay the full value of the ox. Why does Torah need to continue and say v'hamei and the carcass will be his? The mazik, if he has to pay a full ox, obviously the carcass is his. Shema Aminel and Nizik, it must be that actually the loy, who is v'hamei loy, the carcass will be his. Who's the his? Shema Aminel and Nizik, it's actually the one who was damaged. Who was damaged. Okay, so we basically have 3 verses here. One is a verse with regard to Adam Hamazik, a man who kills an animal. The second verse is with regard to a shomer, a watchman, who isn't careful and allows a coyote to consume the animal. And the third is with regard to a shor hamuad, a wild, violent animal that gores another animal until it dies. Okay, it's necessary to have 3 psukim. Why? The ikas of Rachmana Mehachal. I'm sorry, ikas of Rachmana Makka Behem Shalmeno. The Torah would only refer to a person who kills an animal, because that's quite unusual. Aval Torfa Shchicha Emaloi. But in a scenario, in other words, when did the Torah say the nizik, the one who was damaged, has to deal with the carcass in an unusual scenario? But in a common scenario where a coyote eats an animal, Emaloi, maybe the mazik would have to peddle the animal. So tzricha, therefore, it has to write that if the watchman wasn't careful and the animal was consumed by a coyote, then also the nizik, the one who was damaged, has to deal with the carcass. If I would have a scenario of the coyote consuming the animal, because over there in that scenario, he didn't actually kill it with his own hands. In other words, the watchman sort of allowed the coyote to eat the animal. Coyote doesn't belong to him. It happened on its own. And that's why, because he's less involved, maybe the Torah would say in that scenario, the nizik, the one who was damaged, would have to deal with the carcass. But in a scenario where there was an active damager, that would be the person who kills the animal. Maybe then the person would have to deal with the carcass, not the nizik. If I had either of these situations, I would say one is unusual, and one he didn't actually do himself. His animal, the watch allowed a coyote, which is a wild animal that's ownerless, to kill. However, an animal that belongs to him and engages in activity, damaging activity, which is usual, because remember, this is a shur hamud, right? It's an animal that's already shown that it doesn't mind being violent. So maybe then it's the responsibility of the mazik. Maybe not. So therefore, the Torah has to say, no. In that scenario also, even though his culpability is much greater, he's still, the nizik still has to deal with the carcass. The Iyashmin, and if it would have said Hamesi Eloi, this last scenario of the ox, that's a Sharamud, we should have been Moina Kamazik. 1 second.
Page positions, please.
5 lines to the bottom of the page. Okay. Okay. In other words, maybe they only said that the carcass belongs to the nizik when it's his money that does the damage, not when he himself does the damage. That's much more severe. It's therefore it's necessary to write 3 different verses to indicate to us that in all scenarios, the carcass is the responsibility of the nizik, the one who was damaged. Amalei Rav Kahana, the Rav. Rav Kahana says to Rav, hold on a second. Al time of the Kasav Rachman Rav Hamesi Eloi. I have a pasuk to tell me that the nizik, the one who was damaged, has to deal with the carcass. But if not for this verse, I would think the carcass belongs to the mazik, the one who damaged. Hold on a second. Let's say the mazik cat is in the business of selling treifus, of selling non-kosher animals. Obviously, it's a questionable business to be in, but let's say he was. And he has 5 dead animals. He's allowed to give 5 dead animals as payments. So who cares? Why is it important to say that the carcass belongs to the nizik? Let the carcass belong to the mazik. He could pay with it anyway. You hear the question? If he could pay in brand, he could also pay in carcasses. If you could pay with the carcass of the animal itself, is that even a question? Together? Yeah, the question. In other words, what's this big idea that the nizik has to deal with an available on the carcass? The mazik could pay with the carcass anyway. So in the worst case scenario, that the mazik actually has the carcass, you can consider it as part of the payments. So it says it has to do with the degrading of the carcass. The fact the carcass is worth less with every passing hour. Right, with every passing hour, it's not pushed and sold. It's going to degrade, and it'll be worth less. Who takes that loss? If it belongs to the nizik, then actually the nizik takes the loss. If on the other hand it belongs to the mazik, then the mazik would have to have it evaluated in court as soon as possible, and only then would it be considered payment. Not at its value at the moment of death, but at its value at the moment of payment. So the difference is that difference in the moment of death and the moment of payment. That's where it makes a difference whether the carcass belongs to the nizik or to the mazik. So Gemara suggests Tanoigi. Maybe this question is machlokes Tanam. In Torif Yivi. Okay. In other words, if the shomer, if the watchman was not careful and a coyote ate the animal, so Yaviu aid. What does that mean? Yavi aidim shenitru from Ines or Potter. He should bring witnesses that the animal was that he wasn't responsible. In other words, he watched the animal accordingly. A coyote broke into his backyard and killed the animal. Upotter, and then he'll be exempt. And the reason for this is because even though he's a paid watchman, he's still exempt from damage that happens by Ines, when it isn't his fault.
We on 11A, Rabbi?
Top line 11A. Abishol says, Yavi aduda lebezdin. He should bring the carcass to court. Okay, so in other words, the first opinion says this scenario is a scenario of noisei sachar, I believe, from noisei sachar or seicher. Let me just check for a second. Yeah, it's noisei sachar. So explain. Okay, so we're talking about noisei sachar. What is this? This means he's a paid watchman. He's liable if the animal is lost or stolen, but he's exempt in case of where there was nothing he can do to prevent the death of the animal. So if he brings testimony that there was nothing he could do to prevent this coyote from killing his animal, so then he's exempt from paying. Abishol says you bring the carcass to court. What does that mean? Why is it important that you bring the carcass to court? The Marasavar Plasneveld in Izakava, Marasavar de Mazakava. The Gemara is pointing out here, it's unlikely that they actually directly disagree. You think that Abishol says that if there was a way, that if there was no way he could prevent the accident, he would have to pay? Obviously not. Abishol agrees that in the case of a freak accident, noisei sachar is exempt from payment. It's only in cases of where he could have engaged in more protective behavior where he'd be chayav. And presumably the rabbis agree that somebody has to deal with the carcass. The question is who. So the rabbi now Abishol says you have to bring the carcass to court. What does that mean? You have to evaluate the carcass. So the Gemara's proposal is as follows. The rabbis say Chas Nevela is the nizik, meaning the carcass is evaluated at the time of its death. Whereas Abishol says, no, you have to bring it to court and evaluate it at that moment. What's the difference? According to Abishol, Chas Nevela, the decrease in the value is the responsibility of the mazik, of the damager. So you actually have to make a contemporaneous evaluation at the time of payment if you want to use the carcass as a means of payment. Whereas the rabbis say, Chas Nevela, the nizik, the decrease in value belongs to the nizik, and therefore you don't have to make the evaluation in court because the evaluation is actually made at the time, based on looking at this animal. What would it be worth at the time that it died? Okay, so that's the proposal. So Gemara says, "Loi, not necessarily the kulam of the nizik." Everyone in this scenario agrees that the loss of value is the responsibility of the nizik. The debate here is who's responsible for dealing with it. In other words, so you have, let's say, for example, this is a bit of a different scenario. Let's say the carcass is in a pit, right? You have to bring a hydraulic lift to take it out, right? It's a heavy animal. It's a heavy animal. It's 1,000 pounds at least, and it's not gonna. You can't just carry. 3 people are not gonna have to lift it out. It's as heavy as a small car. Yeah.
Start a big fire in the pit and roast the carcass right there.
Yeah, I guess so.
All right, good.
Okay. So who has the responsibility of lifting it up, taking it out? So that's the machlekes. Abishol says the responsibility is the mazik, and the rabbis say the responsibility is the nizik. The Gemara says Vatanya, and indeed we have another brayse that says Acherim Imrim. Somebody says Acherim is a reference to a few people, typically a reference to either a mayor or Elisha ben Avuya, which oddly enough is Meir's Rebbe. Minayin sha'al habor lahalois shorami baroi. How do we know that the owner of the pit is responsible for lifting it out of the pit? Talmud loymer kesef yoshev l'bolav v'hames. He has to give the money. He has to pay the owner v'hames. The verse actually says kesef yoshev l'bolav. You have to make the payment. V'hames yaloi, and the carcass belongs to the original owner. Kesef yoshev means sort of you fill his loss. Now, the way he interprets the verse is Kesef Yashel Avolov, return the money, meaning the loss to the owner, Vehames, and the body, the carcass. In other words, the mazik, the one who damaged, is responsible for bringing out the carcass, for taking it out. Yeah, this by the way is obviously a very contemporary problem. You drive in the mountains over here all the time, and somebody gets into an accident, right, in the snow, and their car is somewhere out in the forest, 20 feet from the roadway. Like, who's going to take it out? Leave it there until the snow thaws 8 months later. You see this all the time. So anyway, so over here it's the balabor, the one who's responsible. The one who put it there, he's responsible. Okay, Amla Abaya Larova. So Abaya says to Rova, Hi Terech Nevela Hey Domi. This responsibility to deal with the carcass, whose responsibility is it? Okay, in other words, what's going on? In the pit, it's worth 1 coin. Va'aguda, at the edge of the pit, shavi arba, it's worth 4 coins, right? Which kind of makes sense, right? If somebody sells you a wrecked automobile that's somewhere 100 feet off the forest and 8 feet of snow, it's worth a lot less than an automobile in a wrecker's lot, right? At least over there, the wrecker can sort of part out the vehicle. But if it's somewhere where it's impossible to get to, and it's going to cost you $100 to hundreds of dollars to retrieve it, it's not worth all that much. 1 second. So then he's sort of working for himself. Hold on 1 second. Okay. In other words, why does according to the opinion that says that the responsibility of lifting it out of the pit is the mazik, the damager, then it should be the case that he should, if it's worth more money out of the pit, then he should want to take it out of the pit without buying complement available, because it's going to be part of the payment. He'll increase the value of his payments. So why do we need to tell me that it belongs to the nizik? It would be obvious that if he's responsible anyway to take it out, then he, even if it would belong to him, he would want to take it out, because it would considerably reduce his payments. It's a scenario where it's worth 1 coin in the pit, and it's also worth 1 coin at the edge. Gemara says, "Make a kayavna, such a thing possible." So Gemara says, "In it is To Amrinchi, because people say kshur b'masa mezuzah, kshur b'daber mezuzah. A beam in the city is worth a coin, and a beam in the desert is also worth a coin. Okay, very interesting Gemara here. Yes.
And my man getting all wrong, but a beam is worth the same, two different locations, but a beam in a desert may have less utility. It will probably be harder and more dangerous to transport. I mean, it seems its value is different, but just me.
Yeah, I would hear that. It would seem that there should be a difference in value, but evidently there isn't. And that's not terribly surprising. Such things exist. Some things. Okay. Omer Shmuel. So Shmuel says, "Ein shaman lo leganav lo legazin el lenazaken." Okay, so Shmuel is a very piece of practical halacha. Okay, and this is sort of a workaround again, like we saw before. For every type of damage, the halacha is bailam etaplim ben avelo. The original owner is responsible for dealing with the fragments, whatever's left. But Shmuel has made a practical innovation, and he said as follows: Ein shaman loy leganav loy legazan el lenazaken. If you have a thief or robber, whether he's nighttime robber or daytime robber, he steals something and it breaks. You don't evaluate the carcass for him. So he's effectively what you tell the robber is you have to make him whole. And what about the carcass? We're not going to evaluate it for you because we want you to make him whole, not to use the carcass as a way to reduce your payments. It's sort of a penalty because you engaged in obviously forbidden behavior. Somebody who damages is sort of, he might be negligent, but he might, he certainly, in most cases, at least you hope, it wasn't intentional. So, okay, for Nezikin, we're going to evaluate the damages. But if you're a thief, we're not going to evaluate it. Which effectively means you'll have to make him completely whole without trying to argue that the fragments should count as some sort of mitigating factor on the payment scale. Okay. Vani Aimer and Shmuel says, and I think as well, Afla Shoyal, that a borrower as well, we don't offer him this credit. If you borrowed money, if you borrow an animal, we will not allow you to deduct the value of the carcass from what you owe the guy who you borrowed from, the guy who lent you the item. 1 second. Okay, the Abba Maidali and Rav agrees to me. Ibailahu. The Gemara says, hold on a second. To a borrower, we do evaluate because it is a component of the payment, and Rav agrees. He says also a borrower you don't evaluate, or also a borrower you do evaluate. Which one? What's the also? Toshma. A guy borrowed a axe from his friends. Narga is a hammer. An axe, okay. Tavra, broke it. Also came to Rav. He came in front of Rav. Go buy him a new axe. Yeah, he basically told him to keep the pieces. Shmamina ain't shaman. We see from here that you do not evaluate to a borrower. To the contrary, Mida Ami the Rav Kahana for Ravasi, the Rav Dinahachi B'Shosek. Rav Kahana and Ravasi were sitting in front of Rav, and they said to Rav, "1 second, what's going on here? Why don't you deduct the value of the fragments?" B'Shosek, and Rav was silent. Rav didn't know what to answer. It seems like he made a mistake. Shemamina Shobman. Evidently, we do evaluate to a borrower. Itmar Amar Ula Amar Belazar. Ula says the name of Rabbi Belazar. Shoman Leganav Legazlan. Even to a robber, we evaluate the fragments. For Papi Amar Ein Shoman. Papi says we don't. The Helchasan that Locha is Ein Shoman Lo Leganav Lo Legazlan. Aval Shoyal Shoman Kidar of Kahana for Vasi. We don't evaluate for a robber. We do evaluate for a borrower, and certainly for somebody who's damaged his friend. Okay. Now we just mentioned Ula, and because we mentioned Ula, the next page is all about Ula. All sorts of different statements that Ula said. We should have enough time to get to the bottom of Yud and base. Okay, so first up is an interesting Gemara. V'amar Ula Amar Belazar. Ula says the name of Rabbi Belazar. Shilya Shiyatza Miktsasa. Shilya is the amniotic sac. Okay, this scenario here is the amniotic sac is clearly a miscarriage, not just a miscarriage, but evidently there may have been a fetus inside. The sac though has no remnants of any fetus. So a woman is carrying amniotic sac and gives sort of births it, but there's no organs in it. It's all dissolved. So some of it exited on one day and some of it exited on a different day. Presumably, it was roughly around sunset time. We count the days of tumah, of impurity, from the first day. Okay, in other words, let's just review this a little. We spoke about this a little in the past. Tumas Yeladis, the tumah of Yeladis. What's the story? 7 days for a male, 8 days for a female. 14 days for a female. And then there's another part, which is that there's something called Yomi Tahara. That means that for the first 7 days, a Yeladis is tummy. After 7 days, even if she's still bleeding, she goes to the mikvah, and all the blood she sees for a male between days 8 and 40, for a female between days 15 and 80 is tahar. It's presumed to be tahar. She's not a nida. Today we're somewhat stringent on that, or maybe not, maybe whatever. We're partially stringent, or maybe completely stringent. It's a separate question. Ask a rabbi. Anyway, but and this is a relatively modern decree going on for about 1,000 years. Regardless, obviously the question here is, what was the fetus, is the dissolved fetus male or female? If it's male, so you have 7 and 40. If it's female, you have 14, but you also have 80 days of tahara. So when do we start counting? So Rav says you count from the first day. Now we'll see here, we'll explain en shilya b'loy v'lat, which means that if there's an amniotic sac, then there must have been a fetus there, and part of that fetus must have come out when the amniotic when she initially birthed part of the amniotic sac. Okay, so Ma'ilam and Arishan, you count from the first day. I'm like Rava. So Rava says, hold on, my dad. What do you mean to say? We should be machmir and say you should count. In this case, we have to be machmir because we don't know if the child was a male or female. So we have to be machmir that tumah is going to be 14 days long. But chumrah day kulahu. It's a chumrah to start a day earlier because you're adding another day. You're saying she's tummy a day earlier, but actually it results in a leniency because she finishes her days a day earlier too. Right? The 14 days are going to end a day earlier. Where we suspect that she's tamei, so anything she touched is tamei. However, we don't count until the second day, the 15 days. In this case, we actually count 15 days, but then our days of purity finish at 40 days, right? And also the same thing will be 40 days from the first day. Okay, Mike Mashmalon, what's the chiddush here? The aim is shilya b'loy vlad, that we don't have a partial amniotic sac must contain a fetus. Tanina, we've already learned this. Okay, so basically, same concept with regard to an animal that was slaughtered. So you have an animal that's slaughtered with a fetus, pregnant animal that was slaughtered. I think I mentioned in the past, modern cloth today is exclusively sourced from the hides of stillborn animals that were slaughtered, but animals are not slaughtered. The animals were killed also. The animals are killed, but the mother was pregnant at the time. And they take the fetus and they skin the fetus, and that skin is used to make cloth. Apparently, it's much softer. It's much easier to work with. Anyway, I guess there's enough global such occurrences to have a supply of cloth. Yeah, I don't know the specifics, but the cloth today is really not as big as what it used to be. Okay. Anyway, where were we here? So basically, similarly, the same halacha is true. Let's say you slaughter an animal and you find a fetus inside. That animal is permitted to eat. Moreover, even if it actually is alive, you sort of slaughter the mother and then you take out the fetus, and the fetus it's a term baby, so it's actually alive. And we permitted to kill it and eat it without slaughtering. It's already slaughtered. So we call it ben pekua. Very interesting halacha. You've already slaughtered the mother. So it's considered slaughtered already. Okay, there are some technical variations. What happens if it started walking? Maybe you'd have to slaughter it just as takana d'Rabbanan. Biblically speaking, by the way, you can kill the animal and eat it. Not only that, if the animal grows up and marries another ben pekua and has a baby, you can kill all the animals and slaughter and eat them, because they're all considered to have been already slaughtered. I mean, d'Rabbanan, there are stringencies. Okay. One of the big risk factors about why this isn't done, why we don't have farms of ben pekuas, is because if a ben pekua has a relationship, if a ben pekua was conceived with one, if you have two parents of an animal, one is a ben pekua, one isn't, then you can't slaughter the baby. Baby's forever forbidden. It's an interesting feature. It's because it's as if you stop the middle of the slaughter. Because one parent is a normal animal, one parent is a ben pekua, can never eat the animal. Okay. That being said, let's say the mother birthed part of the amniotic sac before it was slaughtered, so that amniotic sac was birthed. Therefore, you can't eat the amniotic sac. If you slaughter them, Asr b'achila is forbidden. Why is this? Why is it forbidden? Because it's presumed to have a portion of the fetus in it. And the Gemara says, "Siman v'ad b'isha, siman v'ad b'behema," that effectively a woman, whether it's a human or an animal, the amniotic sac is indicative of a fetus.
Rabbi, you clearly have a fetus attitude.
Okay, 1 second. Okay, even a season, if it was just from this 1 second. If it was just from this Mishnah, I would think top of 11b, the yesh mixes shliya b'loy vlad, that it is possible to have a partial amniotic sac without any component of fetus inside of it. And the reason why it's forbidden is because of a rabbinic decree. However, with regard to a woman, we would not have this decree. In other words, we would say that perhaps she birthed part of the amniotic sac, but there was nothing inside of it. There was no fetus. And even if there was a fetus, maybe it wasn't majority. In which case, certainly we should count from the second day, not from the first day. The tumah should be in effect from the second day, when she actually birthed the sac, and not from the moment that it came out on the first day. There shouldn't be any reason to be machmer, stringent, because it could be that there was no fetus at all, or it could be that even if there was a fetus, it wasn't a majority. The majority is what determines whether or not she's tummy. Therefore, that's the chiddush shavula to tell you that in every amniotic sac you will find a portion of the fetus, and the only doubt is whether it was a majority or not, and therefore you have to be stringent and count from the first day. Yeah, tumah is from the first day, and counting is in the second day.
What from the second day?
You count the 14 days, and then the 40 and 80 days. So 14 days of tumah,
Right.
and then 40 days, and then the remaining days till 40 are tahara. So 26 days. 26 days of tahara.
Oh, so the count, you started the count on the second day
For the 14-day count starts.
14 days.
Yeah, but your tumah already is on the first day. Okay, but Amar Ula Blazer, Ula has an Amar Blazer, Bechor Shenitraf B'Seich Lamed Yomi Ein Paydin. If a firstborn was killed within 30 days, we do not do Pidyon Aben. Because the verse says Padei Sifta, you have to redeem, repeat it. Ach Padei Sifta, Yachal Filu Nitraf B'Seich Lamed Yomi. Talmud Leimer Ach. Ach means only. In other words, there's a type of firstborn that isn't redeemed. What's that? Someone who was killed within the first 30 days.
Okay, Rabbi, just a question. Is it died in the first 30, or
the word
delivered? They killed the first 30 days make a difference.
So the word nitraf here typically means killed.
So deliberately. Okay, right.
No, not necessarily. Not deliberately, but not from an illness. Not from illness.
If a child seems perfectly healthy in the first 30 days, is that say killed by a goy, It's like
So-
external interference.
Yeah, so
Does
it appears-
the child get treated like a normal burial, or
I believe it does get treated normal burial. Yeah.
okay, all right, just
Yeah. It doesn't. The word nitrof typically is a non-typical event. So it's not like the child was ill or was a question of whether or not it would live or not. This seems to have been a perfectly viable baby that was. Nitrof is typically associated with wild animals.
I see.
So a beaver came and swapped it or something. Okay, a large animal is acquired with mashicha by pulling it. We learned that it's acquired by masira. Masira is by grasping the controlling feature of the animal, typically the halter. So you hand over the halter to your friend, and that's how he acquires the bull. The Gemara says he holds like a different opinion. The rabbis say that both a large and small animal are acquired by mashicha with pulling it, moving it. Shimon says they're both acquired by lifting it. How do you lift it? Remember, we had two opinions in Kedushin. One said you make a pile of stuff and you have it walk onto the pile. That's how you quote unquote lift it. And the other version was that you go into a tree and you stick out some food and the elephant will jump to get the food. I don't know if an elephant can actually jump. But Amar Ula, I've heard conflicting reports. I haven't seen any. But Amar Ula, Amar Belazar. Ula says in Belazar, another statement of Ula. So you have a tragic situation where a father dies young and he has kids. You have to divide up the estate. The kids are legally speaking adults, even though they actually live in his house. So you actually evaluate the clothing that they're wearing. That's part of dividing up the inheritance. But if they have grandkids that are wearing the clothing, from their father, the father has grandchildren that are wearing his clothing, you don't evaluate that because you're not bringing them into court. It's too embarrassing. The Papa says, even what they're wearing, you don't evaluate. Okay, so this is sort of the argument of why some people buy very expensive clothing. Basically, let's say you have it's a tragic situation. Somebody dies young. You have one son, and he's 25 years old. And the rest of the kids are under 18. So he's sort of the leader. He's going to have to sort of take care of the estates, and it's important that he dress appropriately for the job. If he walks around wearing tattered clothing, he probably won't get such good deals to divide up the estate. And therefore, the dress is considered an expense, and it's paid for by the brothers. It's not evaluated. He's allowed to spend money on nice clothes. V'amar Ula Amar Belazar. Okay, this is probably the last one. Ula says the name of Belazar. Shomer Shemasar l'Shomer Potter. Very interesting halacha. So I have a car, and I park it in Jules' driveway. Can you watch my car? I'm going to New York. You mind if I put it in your driveway? Fine, yeah, no problem. Anyway. Somebody else, you decided that you're also going away on a trip. You want the car to be washed in somebody else's driveway, so you drive it over to Steve's house. You park in Steve's driveway, and you give him $5 for his trouble, for using his driveway. So I'm a shomer chinam. Steve now is a shomer sacher. And so you were a shomer chinam. Steve was a shomer sacher. You'd be exempt if the car was stolen. Steve would not. Steve would have to pay, right? Shomer shemasar l'shomer potter. The car was stolen, you're exempt from paying.
I think Jules got off scot-free. I mean, he was negligent enough to pass it off to someone like Steve for
We'll get to it. We'll see. There's a second opinion that says that, but the first opinion says, I know a watchman can hand it over. Not only that, but not only this scenario where Jules is an unpaid watchman. So Jules would be exempt in this situation because stealing would exempt you. But Steve over here is liable because Steve is a shomer sacher, so he increased the level of culpability. Even if Jules was a shomer sacher, so Jules would be responsible for a stolen item, and Steve is a shomer chinam. Steve was unpaid. I paid Jules to watch it. Jules did not pay Steve to watch it. I decreased the culpability of the watching. Now Potter, I'm also exempt. Because I handed it over to someone who is responsible. However, Rava disagrees, and he says, in this case, he would be liable And not only not only if you were a paid watchman and Steve was an unpaid watchman, where you were negligent because you handed over to somebody who's less culpable than you were. But even the opposite, even if you were unpaid and Steve was paid, so Steve is more liable than you were, doesn't make a difference. Jules is still liable. Why? I trust you to make an oath. I don't trust Steve to make an oath. So that's sort of the big debate here. We'll stop here. But the major question, the machlekes between Ula and Rava is: can one watchman hand it over to another watchman, or does the original owner have a right to say, I don't agree to this. I don't agree that you should hand it over. I trust you, but not the second guy. And this is the debate between Ula and Rava. Okay.